talking with Cara Bradley, author of the book On the Verge. Thank you, May. I see May Vu, one of my former guests, is listening to the Facebook live stream. I was just responding to your guest question about Facebook Live. Oh, I don't know, but May, if you have questions or comments, just type it into the comments field. Actually, this is for everybody. I mean, thank you, Gigi. Thank you, Jane, for listening. But if you guys have questions, you can just type it into the comments field. I'll see it, and then I'll ask my guest, Cara, your question. So, Cara, as we were talking before, you were running your basically last track race of your college career, right? And then you basically sort of intuitively created a state where you were very clear, very present, ran the best race of your life and didn't even realize it until it was over. And then afterwards, you said you went back and kind of analyzed what had happened in so many different angles. How long did it take you to really fully understand afterwards what you had done?
About 30 years.
30 years. Just a little bit of time.
Right. This state, I actually feel like I fell back into this state of being. And this is what's so amazing about being human.
Yeah.
About having this incredible human experience, is that there is this state, this natural state of our being that's available to us always. And it's happening all the time, and we can talk about this a little bit more.
Yes.
But on that day, I fell back into this very ordinary way of being alive that gave me access to this strength and this confidence I didn't think. Right? I didn't think I had.
So you said before also that this was not a peak state. And for those of you familiar or not familiar with Tony Robbins, he's really into like getting yourself into this peak state before you go out and do something so that you're doing your personal best. But you said this wasn't a peak state.
Well, it didn't feel like a peak state.
Didn't feel, okay.
It didn't feel like, it felt very ordinary. It didn't feel like I had created anything or that it was going to go away anytime. It felt eternal.
Okay.
This was I felt more genuinely me than I'd ever felt. And which is one of the reasons why I don't really call it the flow state either. Because I've done a lot of research and a lot of my own experimentation with flow state. And so it has aspects of flow and in the zone. But I feel like it's much vaster than that. Interesting. And so you now teach like yoga and meditation. Is this something, would you call it in some ways like a quasi-meditative state? Sure.
Okay. And so afterwards you were looking at all of this and looking at, what you sort of created for yourself. Were you then able to sort of recreate it or drop back into it for other things and other aspects of your life?
Right, so I went on this journey, looking for how do I do this again? And not only how do I do it again, but how do I do it on purpose? How do I access this state, not by accident like what happened to me on the track? Because I knew in that moment, boy, if I could do this again in all aspects of my life, I'm going to shine big time. And then that's what took me on the journey. So I went from walking on coals with Tony Robbins to sitting in sweat lodges to having the chakras cleared and all the things that we do when we're on search.
We're on our path.
We're on that path. And so I really became a human potential junkie.
Okay.
Just looking for all ways to access. What does it mean to access my potential? Where is my potential? Why can't I access it all the time? And so I've been a big questioner.
Right. So I have to ask you, did you like completely annoy all your friends and family at the time? Did they think like you had lost it? Like what happened to Cara? She was like so normal before, now she's crazy?
Well, I still do. I think I really do people. Sorry.
You don't annoy me at all. I love it. I love having people like you in my life.
I've had more than one boyfriend say to me, "You're just never going to be satisfied." And I'm like, I guess I'm not. I just want to just live this life, boy.
Well, the answer to that statement is, and what's wrong with that?
And what's wrong with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, what were you doing at the time? Like when you graduated college, what were you doing just to support yourself while you were on this search? Because you don't make a living by searching about your potential.
Right. Oh, that's a great question. So when I graduated, I became an investment banker because that's what you do when you're at NYU and you're in New York City.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And so I did that for a few years. And I remember my little cubicle, I looked out on Central Park and I saw the whole, just about the whole park from my window, and I kept thinking during the day, like, what are those people doing out there? That they could be out there during the day.
Yeah.
And I'm in here inside. Like, I gotta be out there.
Right.
And so I ended up quitting my job, dropping out of my MBA program, and I went back to teaching figure skating.
Oh,
yes,
interesting.
In New York City.
Wow.
My poor parents. I
They must have had so many gray hairs. Yeah, I bet.
But I fell into...
Well, good for you for having the courage to do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, at 23, it was like, what the heck, let me just do this.
Yeah, do it now before you have too many responsibilities, and then it becomes more difficult. Yeah.
Right, because it just wasn't answering it for me.
Right.
You know, it just, the money, I wasn't interested, just that interested. So I got involved with rollerblade at the very beginning of the whole rollerblade scene.
Yeah.
And I ended up teaching rollerblade and performing for rollerblade
for
a bunch of years worldwide, just doing these hip-hop shows on rollerblades.
Oh, cool.
And teaching, putting together programs. So the figure skating, that my parents made me hang up my skates at 15 actually started to pay bills.
Did you go back to them and say, see, that actually was a good investment?
That's right.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
So as you're going through this stuff and you're learning more, and understanding more about what you had done, how long did it take you to be able to like drop back in that state or recreate that state you had been in that day?
Right, so I've had glimpses of it.
Okay.
We all have glimpses of this natural, ordinary state all day long, by the way.
Yeah. Oh,
which
really?
Which is not really taught to notice and recognize. Yeah, this is happening all the time.
Okay.
And so I started to get closer and closer skating the streets of New York City and skating all over the world and starting to really connect mind, body in a different way. I fell into the practice of yoga.
Okay.
And then into the practice of meditation. And now I was getting close. Yeah. Now I was able to have a practice, a predictable practice that I could work with every day that would help me to start to experience and become familiar with myself beyond busyness, beyond thinking, right? Beyond doubt and fear, sort of like I felt on the track that day.
So you say this is something that we can access at like any time, and we're just not taught to recognize it. But even with yoga and with meditation, it's more you're taught to create a state. That doesn't teach you necessarily to recognize something that's naturally happening throughout the day. When did you really get that sense that like, oh, this is not just something you put yourself into, this is something that you can be in throughout the day when you're not meditating and not doing yoga?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because this is exactly what gets me going and exactly why I teach. Right? I'm not interested in really teaching people yoga poses. I mean, yoga poses are great, and they're fun to play with, and they do have their values. What I'm more interested is helping people to experience and recognize what's actually happening during the yoga pose. So we use these poses just as we use a breathing tool. We use different exercises to help us show up and look at ourselves. So I'd love to explain to you, if I may, what the Verge is, because I think that'll help me and help us all understand.
Okay, so before we get to that, then you titled your book "On the Verge." What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So years after my race, maybe 6, 7 years after, 8 years after, my husband, then I got married, and my husband went and spent some time in the Amazon. in the Ecuadorian Amazon with an indigenous community.
Ah, wonderful, wonderful. You know, I'm practicing a shamanistic lineage. It's Peruvian, but yes, I'm very familiar with those traditions in general.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you can help me out here too.
Certainly.
So when he was down there, he recognized that when they were sailing down the rivers, the different tributaries, the indigenous people that he was with, they would often stop at these different spots of land where rivers met, where ecosystems collided. And when he came home and he did some research, he found out that these places on this spot of land where ecosystems collide is actually where nature thrives. There's the most diverse amount of species and just the most abundant plant life and wildlife. These places are called the Verge.
Ah.
And so when he said that, my eyes lit up.
Okay.
I said, oh my God, is there a Verge here? Is there a Verge near me? What would it feel like, being the human potential junkie that I was? How would it feel to stand on the Verge, to be there? And so this got me really thinking, like, where do we thrive?
So I can tell you from an energetic perspective why that happens, or one of the explanations I've heard of why that happens. So there are these things that run throughout the earth about 6 feet under the ground called ley lines, which, you know, people have mapped out that, like, a lot of these ancient sacred sites, if you look at them from a broad enough perspective, they like line up over thousands of miles of distance. And then there are different people have tried to sort of measure and map sort of these ley lines and how they go around the earth. And people who are energetically sensitive can often sense them or feel them. It's sort of, and I had this experience myself for the first time, not for the first time, but recently I had this experience. A friend of mine who has a farm upstate New York near Goshen, there's like the house on one side of the street and the farmland on the other side. And there's a trail that goes all the way through the farmland. Some of it's wild, it's out to this little river that cuts through the property. And I was on my way walking through the trail, and I'd walked this trail before, but then all of a sudden there was this area where there's this like little bump in the trail, and I stopped for a second. I felt like I walked through a wall or like a membrane of some kind. And then I looked to my right and I looked to my left, and there was a line of trees, like not right next to me, but there was one in the distance there, and another one past it further to the right. There was one on the left, and another one on the left, and a third one on the left, and a fourth one on the left. And then all of a sudden it struck me, there's a ley line here. You see, because this is where sort of energies come around. So what he's talking about of like two rivers coming together, typically in that section where there's this huge diversity, that's two different ley lines coming together. From an energetic perspective. Now, a lot of people think it's woo-woo, hokey, you know, not real stuff. But again, if it makes sense and you can see it in different places, maybe there's something to it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thanks. Thanks for that story.
So, and just to relate to this idea of being on the verge, you know, how do you equate the verge in our life? I'm guessing, and again, I haven't read your book yet, but I'm guessing there is a very energetic component to this, that it's when sort of this energetic state maybe of mindfulness and presence and something else sort of all come together and crisscross, that's when you drop into the verge. Am I close?
You are so close.
Cool. Cool. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, great. Well, you know, it's time for us to take another commercial break. If anyone would like to call in and ask Cara a question or myself a question, of course, our call-in number is 877-480-4120. Again, you can go to my Facebook timeline, Sam Leibowitz in New York City. That's Leibowitz spelled Liebowitz, for our Facebook Live video. We've got several viewers now. Thank you guys for listening. We're going to go to break, and we'll be right back.